Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to another edition of Symphony's Build a Bot series. My name is Yong Sheng and I am based in Singapore. With me today is my colleague Kaosar, who is based in London.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, and thank you to everyone coming to this webinar.
So, welcome to another edition of this Build a Bot series brought to you by the Symphony Developer Relations team. These are informative sessions on building bots on Symphony, and our previous topics have included things like insights into Symphony's bot and workflow developer kits, security considerations, and production resilience.
Before we cover today's content, we wanted to make sure everyone here is well aware of the Symphony Developer Center, which was launched last year. This is a one-stop shop for all developer resources from getting started to certifications, and it also includes recordings to previous sessions of the Build a Bot series. So do check it out if you haven't seen any or if you've missed any sessions.
So, today's session will run for about half an hour, and we will be covering some of the new features that are available for developers as part of the BDK ecosystem. We will first do a recap on the BDK's architecture, followed by what this new BDK extension framework is about, and then we'll dive into a demo on how to build an extension. After that, we will introduce the first use case of extensions in the form of Symphony Groups and do a demo of that as well. And at the end of this session, we will open the floor for questions.
So please take advantage of the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You can submit questions as we go along today's session, and at the end of the session, we'll get to them. So let's get started. Yong, can you give everyone a quick recap of the BDK architecture?
Sure. So let's do a quick recap, right? The key principles behind why the BDK was created are based on two things: keeping it simple and keeping it modular. So eventually what we hope to have is an ecosystem of modules. And how that works is we have these three layers as part of the BDK: Core, Advanced, and Integration. And within these three layers, you have these various modules. Now, these modules are grouped together in what we call the BDK Core and are maintained by Symphony. Additionally, we have also a vision for other modules that will be part of this ecosystem, and these modules will be built by the community, and this community could be other Symphony teams working on additional functionality or the greater open source community as well. So, Kaosar, can you tell everyone how we are helping to advance this ecosystem?
Sure. So today we're introducing the BDK extension as a new concept within the BDK ecosystem. Extensions are a standalone package that have access to internal BDK components. The bots will make use of the BDK itself and extensions that add different capabilities. When a bot project uses the BDK to execute logic, the BDK internally makes use of components such as configurations, an API client factory, an authenticated session, and a retry builder. Extensions have access to these same components as well as the ability to define custom services via provider interface. This allows bot projects to opt in on additional Symfony-related capabilities as required for their given workflows. So let's take a look at how to actually build an extension.
So at the core, an extension is just a regular class that implements the BDK extension interface. It will contain some business logic, and this is all arbitrary, so it could be in the constructor or any custom methods. But how do you expose an extension's logic to bot projects? You use this service concept. So in addition to the BDK extension interface, your service-enabled extension also needs to implement BDK extension service provider parameterized with the class name of your service class. This service class needs to implement BDK extension service, and all public methods defined in this class are available to bot projects to consume. So back to the extension class, it needs to override the getService method that returns an instance of your service class.
On the bot project side, you need to add the extension as a project dependency. Afterwards, you would then need to register the extension. You can either take the existing Symfony BDK object and call the extensions.register followed by the extension class, or additionally, you can use the extension call if you're using the builder model. For Spring projects, if the extension class was already defined as a bean, nothing needs to be done here. Else you can just add @bean reference to the extension in an configuration class. Now that our extension is registered, how does our bot call a custom service? we can reference the extension using bdk.extensions.service followed by the extension class name. This returns an instance of the service class as defined in the getService method in the extension class earlier. Once we have this instance, we can call any public method within it. For Spring projects, since the extension instance is a bean, you can auto-wire it and call getService followed by the method calls.
So our extension-enabled bot is now fully wired up. But how does the extension actually make use of BDK components? This is where the BDK aware interfaces come in. We discussed the need to implement BDK extension as well as BDK extension service provider earlier. But there is a list of other interfaces included with an aware suffix that expose BDK components to an extension. Implementing each of these interfaces will require your extension class to override a set method, where the BDK will deliver the active instance of that component. For example, implementing BDK config aware will require your extension class to override set configuration, which exposes a BDK config object. Your extension can then read the BDK config object and obtain the current bot's configuration that is running. So it will be able to extract the pod host name, proxy server, data feed version, and so on for whatever workflow necessary. Alright, I think there's been a lot of talking. Let's show everyone how to build and use an actual BDK extension. Kaosar, all yours.
We need to open up a terminal window and create a new directory. We're going to call this directory extension demo. We'll next navigate into this directory and we will start with the Yong Symphony generator. The pod host, we're going to enter in develop2.symphony.com. For the bot username, we're going to be using the Java BDK bot for this example. For the type of application, we're going to select bot application. We're going to use Java programming language, Java no framework. And for the build system, we're going to select Maven. For the remaining configurations for this demo, we're going to just use the default values. So we're just going to enter for the group ID, enter for the artifact ID, and enter for the base package. What we will see is the RSA keys being generated and the BDK bot being built by the generator. We will start this in IntelliJ by using the following command, and this will open the BDK project in IntelliJ. Okay. First, we just need to double check in the pom.xml that our Symfony BDK BOM is of version 2.6.0. If you're on a lower version, you just need to make sure that you're on at least 2.6.0 if you're looking to try the same thing in this demo. What we need to do is we're going to just navigate to the bot code that comes along with the BDK example, and we're just going to clean it up, and we're going to start with the blank canvas. For the bot code, we're just going to remove some of this code that we don't require. And now what we will do is we're going to create a new Java class. And this Java class is going to be for our extension. We're going to call it config extension. Next, we're going to use implement. And we're going to implement an interface. This interface is going to be called BDK extension. Next, what we need to do is we're going to create a new Java class. And this is for the service. So we're going to call this config service. And for this config service, we're going to implement another interface. And for this one, it's going to be called BDK Extension Service. Great. We're going to add a arbitrary method. And what we'll start is we use public string. And for this method, what we want is we're going to use it to get the pod host. So we're going to call this get pod host. And for now, we're just going to return a blank value where we will return to this and we will populate this. So we're just going to go back to the config extension and we're going to add the next BDK interface. And this BDK interface is going to be the BDK Extension Service Provider. Now we need to add a parameter for this BDK Extension Service Provider, and that is going to be the name of this config service. So we're going to just borrow that, come back here, and add it as a parameter. Next, we need to implement the method. So once we do that, we'll see we have the get service. So we just do that, and then we need to add an instance of the config service. That will be config service. What we can do is then take this config service and have it returned here. Now, if the config service is not running, we need to have a way for this config service to start. So we're going to add an if statement. Now this if statement is going to be config service. If it is null, we're going to ask it to start the config service. So we do it by using new, then config service. And we'll close the statement. We'll have to come back to here for the next step. And the next step will be, we're going to implement the BDK aware interface. Now, if we start by going back up to the implement section and we just type in aware, we can see there are different BDK aware interfaces here. So we have the BDK config aware, the retry builder, authentication aware, and the API client factory. For this example, we're going to use a BDK config aware. So we're just going to select that from here. Next, we're going to implement the method and we're going to set the configuration. And that goes here. Now, for the set configuration, we can see that we need to add this here. We need to also ensure this is also in the config service. So we will add that here. And we will use a constructor. We go back to the config extension and we'll now take the BDK config that you see here and we're just going to add it in here. Next, we need to go back to the set configuration and need to make sure that this is set correctly. So we're going to add this BDK config equals to config. Now we can go back to the config service and we can go back to the get pod host at the end here. We're going to replace this now with BDK config, which you can see here. And we're going to use the get pod host. Now with this, you can see there's other options available because we're able to access the public methods for the BDK config. For this example, we're going to use get pod and then we're going to see get host. Now let's go back to the bot code and register the extension and the service. And we'll start with BDK extension .register. And here we just need to make sure that we're using the config extension class. So we're just going to borrow that and we're going to paste it here and just make sure we have the class. The next line, we're going to have BDK.extension.service, and we're just going to do the same. We're going to make sure we have config extension.class. And here we're just going to introduce a variable for this. Now, we need to instruct the BDK bot that we're going to have a / command for this. So when we run the / command, it's going to get the pod host. So let's do this here. So bdk.activities.register / command / and then we will use / pod host followed by false and then context, and then we will add the message that we would like the BDK to return. So we're going to use bdk.message.send, and here we're going to just go with context, get stream ID. We will now add the message we would like the BDK bot to return. So with this pod host is, and then we'll concatenate the config service dot, and then we'll see the get pod host. Okay. So let's start our bot. And what we will see is the bot is going to bootstrap. We're also going to see the extension being registered, and we'll see the data feed start up. Okay, let's go to our develop2 environment. So all we need to do is use our slash command that we've implemented. So that's slash pod host. There we go. This pod host is develop2.symfony.com. So there's our bot returning back the pod host, and that is the end of this demo.
So thank you, Kaosar, for that great demo. And now we are going to move on to look at a new concept called Symphony Groups. So we'll first explain what this new feature is. So Symphony Groups is a new feature in Symphony that allows for the collective identity for teams to appear when responding to contexts. So messages from any group member appear as the group identity itself, and groups can include attributes to differentiate their function, market coverage, responsibilities, and so on. This is currently an external-only feature, but internal use cases are coming pretty soon. So as part of Symphony Groups, there's also a suite of new REST endpoints that are available to manage groups itself. So you can choose to manage groups via the admin and compliance portal, but you can also use APIs to do that. And these APIs allow you to manipulate them, so like creating, updating, listing, and adding members, and so on. The problem with these group endpoints is that you would then need to manually write calls to call them because they are not part of the BDK Core endpoint groups.
So to ease the development of the bots that call the group endpoints, the group extension is now available. This extension allows bot developers to add group functionality to BDK projects. Similar to the BDK core itself, using this extension, it removes the need to authenticate separately and call individual endpoints manually. The extension itself was built using the same constructs discussed before and makes use of a number of BDK extension components, like the service provider, which exposes the endpoint methods to bot developers, the API client factory to build endpoints call internally, the authenticated session to manage tokens, and the retry builder to maintain the same resilience configuration as the BDK core itself. Now let's take a look at how to use and create the group extension in your BDK project.
So building on a similar project to what Kaosar showed earlier, this is just a bare bones project here with just the BDK initialization. And the first thing we're going to do is add the Symphony Groups extension. So it's available today as a dependency. So all you need to do is go into your dependency manager, and we'll add a new dependency to that. So that will be this one right here, Symphony Group extension. Remember to refresh your dependency tree, and you should see it appear there. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and register the extension. So similar to how we did config extension earlier, we'll use the bdk.extensions call, followed by register, pasting in the name of the group extension, which is Symphony Group BDK extension.class. So now that registration is done, we can also obtain the service instance. So bdk.extensions.service, the same extension class name. And that gives us this group service object right here. Let's just call this groups. So the groups call allows you to do various things like add members, list groups, and so on. So these correspond to the individual endpoints that the groups API has. So what I'm going to demo today is looking up a group as well as adding a new member to a group. So let's go ahead and do list groups. I created a group earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and search for that group. So type ID, currently the only ID supported is STL. We have a filter for status, so active groups only. And we'll just leave the rest of those filters as null. One more. So now that we have listed groups, we can get data within the groups And what we're going to do is a filter right here. So the group I created earlier had a name, filter that. So contains, I'll say wealth. It's called wealth managers, as you'll see in a bit. I will assume that it exists, so I can go ahead and find first or else null. So I have this object right here. I will extract that and I'll call this wealth group. So within my wealth group, there are a couple of attributes that I will now extract. So wealth group has an ID. So I'll need this for my add members later. It also has members. So I can use wealth group and get members. This will get me the existing members of the group, right? And each member has this concept called a tenant. So the tenant is basically the identity of your pod. So where the original user belongs to. So we have that tenant there in the form of an integer. And we can now go ahead and add a new member into the group. And we're going to add this existing bot right here into that group. So we'll just prepare that object. We'll call it member equals new member. And then we'll say the member's ID is the bot's ID. So I can use the BDK's bot info object to get the bot's user ID. And then I'll add the member tenant as the same tenant before because we're on the same pod. Now I can use groups.add member to group, and then I'll put in the group ID, which I have extracted earlier, as well as the add member object, putting in that member that I just built. All right. So I'm not putting command handlers and whatnot. It's just a very simple demonstration of how to list groups, filter them, obtain information, as well as add a new member to a group. But before I run this, let's have a look at what groups actually looks like before. So if you look at this screen here, I have the develop to sandbox on the left in black, and I have the partner pod in white on the right. So how this works is that on an external basis, when you look for a group name, so if I look for wealth managers, I will see a group right here. And if I click into it, it will initiate a new conversation. And on the left, you will see another conversation appear. That's right here. So on the left, if you look at the members list, I will see the actual members, right? So that's me, as well as the external party. On the right, however, I will see the group identity. So the difference being if I were to say hello and I say hi in response, you'll see that this is my identity right here, whereas on the right, you will see the response coming from the group identity. So my individual identity is hidden from this chat right here. So I'll go back into code and just run this. And what this is going to do is call the group's endpoint, get the group that I created earlier, the wealth manager group, and then add the bot into that group and then terminate, which it has done now. So if I come back here and I attempt to do the same thing, I will look for that group again. I will initiate a new conversation with that group. I can type hello here, and I can go on the right and I can see hello again. On the external side, nothing changes. I still see the collective group identity and participants, right? However, in the internal pod, you'll notice that there is a new member, which is the bot. So where it didn't appear before, now after calling that REST endpoint, the bot is now a member of the group. So that has been a quick look at how to use an example of extensions, which is the Symphony Groups extension, and how it looks like in real life. So that's it for this demo, and we will now open the floor for questions. Okay, so the first question we got here is regarding availability of the BDK extension framework. And as we mentioned earlier during the demo, it's actually already available. All you need to do is upgrade your version of the BDK that you're using to 2.6.0. That's the minimum required. And then you should be able to go ahead and start building extensions today.
We also have a question when the Symphony Groups will be available to use. So Symphony Groups will be available to use on Symphony Pod version 20.13.2.
And you might want to check in with your technical account manager as well, because this will be turned on a pod by pod basis. The next question is similar to the previous question in that is groups available for developers to test? So the demo you saw earlier was actually run on the developer sandbox on develop2.symfony.com. So if you are already you already have an account on the sandbox, you can actually go ahead and test groups today. So that's enabled already. Okay, we have a question on so the purpose of groups basically, and the question is: was the purpose of groups to automate bringing in of users? So the idea of groups is basically to have a collective identity, and this can solve for a number of different use cases. So it could be a help desk use case where you have an identity that people send in issues to solve problems. It could be a team-based, so it could be a loans team, a sales desk, and so on. And then this collective identity would then respond to maybe an external customer and so on. So you have a very consistent experience as a customer instead of interacting with an individual person. And this makes it more systematic in terms of interactions and makes Symfony a bit closer to what people were used to in the old world, where people use this thing called email. We don't do that anymore. So this is the new way of doing things with Symfony. Any more questions coming in? We'll give it another go. Someone's also asking about availability of the extensions in other BDKs. So to be clear, what you saw earlier was the BDK for Java in how we demoed using extensions. For Python, it isn't available yet, but if there's demand, so please keep feedback coming in. We'll add that to the prioritization stack. So do let us know what you think about it. If it's great, we should add it to different languages and so on, and we will get the product team on it.
We have another question. So cross-firm bots workflow, is that possible with Symfony Groups? So I believe, yes, that is going to be possible with CrossPod, and Symfony Groups will be able to work cross-firm. As our demonstration showed, we had two separate pods, and they were both communicating with each other.
Yeah. So it's external workflows that work today, and then internal will be coming pretty soon. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we had. So let's jump into our next slide here. So it's March today, but also at the end of March, we have another webinar for you guys. So you're in for a treat. We have another feature that's coming to Symfony soon. That's called the Secure Event Service. And what it is a new way for partners to interact with their customers who are on Symfony and be able to build bots that do things that trigger externally. So you no longer have to deploy entire bots and update them on premise. So a very exciting development that we are releasing. If you are a partner, if you are a customer interacting with lots of partners, it will be something that you want to listen to. So do register for this webinar happening on 30th of March, same time, 10 a.m. ET, and the same channels that you got the invite for this webinar on.
I think, we wanted to just thank everyone here for their time today. We hope you enjoyed today's content. And if you want to catch up on this webinar again or any previous webinars, you can go to developers.symfony.com and view those webinars. And we just wanted to shout out to all the Symfony developers around the world for your continued engagement. And we'll hopefully see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.